From Southern California, this is The Circle of Insight, a show about everything in psychology. Hear the latest in news and views on psychology. Our motto is simple: wherever there is psychology involved, we are there. And now, here's your host of The Circle of Insight, Carlos Vasquez.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We have a wonderful show for you. Today, we're going to be exploring what is inside the mind of a terrorist. We have with us a special guest, Dr. Gerald Post. He had a 21-year career at the CIA. He was the founding director of the Center for the Analysis of Personality and Political Behavior. He is currently now director of the Political Psychology Program, professor of psychiatry, political psychology, and international affairs at the Elliott School of International Affairs at George Washington University. Welcome to The Circle, Dr. Post.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
So this is something that's on the minds of a lot of Americans and of a lot of people in the world, is what's going on through the mind of a terrorist. Can you give us some insight?
One of the surprising things to say is that these are psychologically normal individuals. When I was asked to begin my research on the mind of the terrorist at CIA, I was asked because I'm a psychiatrist. And it was assumed that these were crazed fanatics. But in fact, research demonstrates that these are, as individuals, psychologically normal. Rather, it is what determines their behavior is the group and social psychology, the psychology of the extended family even. And I am quite impressed by how often we misinterpret what drives these individuals.
That sounds actually, it's kind of scary since you're saying they may be more normal than we originally thought.
Well, that's really true. That was one of the major conclusions of the at the Summit for Democracy, Security, and Terrorism in Madrid in 2005, and I had the honor of chairing the committee on the psychological roots of terrorism. We had a consensus of the experts on terrorist psychology that this was normal. In fact, and it makes sense as you think about it, terrorists don't want emotionally unstable individuals in their group. They'd be a security risk. You wouldn't want an emotionally unstable soldier in the Delta forces. Terrorists don't want emotionally unstable people in their groups either.
That's an excellent point. I didn't even think about that. Did you notice any biological differences in the sense of their brain?
That's a matter under investigation now, and there is some data suggesting that individuals who have been subjected to chronic trauma may have a readiness to strike out violently. It's interesting. I've had the opportunity of interviewing incarcerated terrorists in a major study published under Terrorists in Their Own Words. And it's a striking phenomenon for many of them how the act of terrorism gave them a sense of meaning and purpose in otherwise meaningless and empty and disaffiliated lives.
That's a strong motivator.
Indeed. In particular, how can a normal individual give his life through an act of suicide terrorism? We've examined this phenomenon in particular, and there are a few things that come out. One, the individual's only sense of meaning comes from his affiliation with that group. And in affiliating with that group, particularly under the influence of hate-mongering leaders who identify the outside enemy as responsible for all these social and economic injustice in that individual's life. And by taking an action, he can be doing something important for his reference group.
Fascinating. Now, that was one of the questions I was going to ask you on the program, is what are some of the motives and beliefs that these terrorists have?
Well, for many of them, they have subordinated their individuality to the group. And the only thing that gives their life meaning is that group. And it's important to distinguish between leaders and followers. The leaders are really quite expert at manipulating the lonely, isolated, unaffiliated individuals who in some ways are seeking a place to belong. One of the things I'm particularly struck by is some of the current developments with social media, where we have individuals being radicalized online who have come to believe that they are joining what I call the virtual community of hatred. They, as individuals, don't count, but they have a sense of belonging, and the terrorist leadership is very expert at manipulating opinions. On one slide, I show al-Awlaki, who I might note in the spirit of full disclosure, was actually the Muslim chaplain at George Washington University at one time, who sees himself as, or saw himself, he's now been killed, as leading this virtual community. The underwear bomber, the Times Square bomber, Major Hassan, my psychiatric colleague at Fort Hood, responsible for the massacre there, all were in touch with al-Awlaki. And it was very striking. Al-Awlaki asked him in an email at one time, is it, according to the Quran, proper to kill a soldier if that soldier is killing Muslims? And got back an answer, it's not only the right thing to do according to Sharia law, it is required when Islam is under attack. So these lonely individuals are given a sense of membership and affiliation through their association online. And that's really a kind of scary development in my judgment, because how do we identify who as individuals are responding to the radical websites? It's now been estimated there is something like 4,500 radical Islamic websites.
4,500?
4,500.
Wow.
And there's no way of shutting them down. You shut down one, and in fact, there's an Islamic how to say this, a message, an internet strategy out there saying to Islamic internet professionals, when you get this message, post it on in your discussion groups. Take this message and make sure it's disseminated. That way, if they try to shut us down, the message is out there. So there's really no way of shutting down the internet sites. There's this rapid propagation.
Hi, welcome to Adelante. This is Adelante Recovery, and my name is Yvette Kuglin, and I'm part of the staff.
Adelante Recovery Center has helped people in dual diagnosis for 5 years. We accept most PPO insurances and provide luxury accommodations and 24-hour support. To speak with an admissions counselor, call 1-888-242-4450.
A lot of time we don't even know what's wrong with us, and sometimes we need to get away to figure that out. So if you want to go for a little retreat out in Corona del Mar, which is a confidential location, we're here to help. So we're only a phone call away. Thank you.
So I want to go back a little bit. So it seems to me that you're saying that the leaders and the followers, and I know we can't tell of everyone, but the majority, or at least the ones we're concerned with, the terrorists, they're not delusional per se, and they're not. Are they psychopathic?
No, there is no psychological test that discriminates between members of a terrorist group and ordinary individuals. They are psychologically normal. We should, however, discriminate amongst them. And in fact, rather than talking about terrorist psychology, it would be well to talk about terrorist psychologies, plural, as you can see in this typology of terrorism, how different they are. And there are generational differences that are important to observe, too. I have elaborated a matrix here which shows the difference between the national separatist terrorists and social revolutionary terrorists. And they're just the opposite psychologically. The national separatists are carrying on the mission of their parents who were damaged by the regime or dissident to the regime, whereas the social revolutionary terrorists are rebelling against a generation of their family which is associated with the regime. So it's quite the opposite psychology.
Yes, that is. Did you find any resonating themes in their family structures or development?
Well, what is particularly resonant for the national separatist terrorists is their being a member of this minority that has been oppressed by the majority. And that becomes very important in Spain. Franco sought to disaffiliate the Basques, as an example, and made it illegal to use the Basque language even. And this set the stage for the development of ETA, the Basque Fatherland and Homeland movement, and the charismatic leadership of that movement. Similarly, in Turkey, Ataturk, in trying to establish a Turkish identity, found the Kurdish psychology threatening and was made derogatory language towards them. The Mountain Turks made it illegal to speak the Turkish language. And this set the stage for Öcalan and the PKK. There was a defensive intensification of identity by the Kurdish people because of the attempts to eliminate that identity by Öcalan. One thinks of the in Northern Ireland, the troubles in Northern Ireland and the tensions between the Protestants and Catholics in that area, which set the stage for the development of the Provisional Irish Republican Army.
Well, it sounds like the external environment can create or engender these kind of terrorists.
Well, the external environment and the nature of the leadership and the tolerance or lack thereof of a minority within that majority, the Tamil Tigers, their rights were of the Tamil people was significantly ignored by the Sinhala of majority there.
Did you realize any kind of patterns in their families? Were their fathers absent, mothers absent, anything like that at all?
Well, that's an interesting question. I've served as expert witness in a number of terrorist trials now. And one of them I remember very vividly, where this, actually the first trial I participated in, where this young man, you had to really go back to his mother. When his mother was 8 years old, she was living in Jaffa, an Arab suburb of Tel Aviv. And the 48 war occurred, and her family had to leave their family home and go to her grandfather's farm on the West Bank. There, they lived relatively happily until 1967, when our terrorist-to-be, Razak, was 8 years old, ironically. And the war occurred, and they were forced to flee again. On the way to Jordan, his mother said to him bitterly, and I had the opportunity of interviewing him at length, said to him bitterly, "This is the second time we're losing our land, we're being kicked out of our homes." He ends up in a refugee camp in Jordan, and there his teacher, sponsored by the United Nations, was a member of the PLO, and told him the only way to become a man is to regain the land stolen from your parents and grandparents. And when he led his terrorist action, skyjacking an Egypt airplane over Malta, it was the high point of his life. He was doing something for his people. And it was very fascinating to see the way he had rejiggered in his mind the heroic nature of his act, and that giving his whole life meaning.
That is very fascinating. Thank you so much, Dr. Post, for that insight. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the show as much as I did. Remember, our motto is simple. Wherever there's psychology involved, we are there. See you next time, everyone.